Chapter 166. Soul felt refreshed as he lay on the ground and looked up at the sky. It had been a good fight. He had bet everything on it and lost. He didn't want to make any excuses like having been overwhelmed by numbers or having his constitution reduced. Whatever it might have been due to, a loss was still a loss. It was his own fault for being forced into the current situation. To begin with, a battle was not merely fighting with each other up front. For instance, before actually fighting, one could create favorable conditions or environments. A battle included all of these things, like strategies and tactics. He had been caught in their plot without realizing it himself and then lost to a fool. That was it. He, ha 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 ha. What's so funny? Even though he was the loser, Soul was laughing loudly. Leon felt unpleasant about this and shouted at him in irritation. I really don't like his pretentious attitude. If he still has a trump card, then he should use it already. He stared at Soul with such thoughts in mind. It's really funny. The G.O.Dis scenario, which had been written over several 10,000, 100,000, or even million years, was made to fall apart so brilliantly in only 200 years. It's so funny that I can't stop laughing. Is that all? Yeah, that's all. What? Could it be that you think I'm still hiding something? If so, you can relax. I've nothing left. You've genuinely won. Even if you leave me be, I'll disappear soon. Hearing Soul's words, which sounded as if he had surrendered to fate, Virgo rushed over. There was no particular reason. It wasn't a calculated move to gain some benefit from his gratitude after healing him. In the first place, if she was being calculative, she wouldn't have rushed over. In other words, she was moving instinctively. This was both her kindness and her foolishness. She held out her hand to heal him, but Soul grabbed her hand to refuse it. Stop it, you kind girl. Kindness may be a virtue, but it's also a weakness in battle. For example, if I take you hostage right now, the situation will be reversed all because of you. Some people can't be saved with kindness alone. There are heretics who wouldn't consider it evil to make use of such kindness. From now on, keep this in mind. Saying that, Soul grabbed Virgo's shoulder and pushed her away. But Virgo couldn't accept it, so Soul desperately tried to convince her. Bulletin, but you're not that kind of person. Even now, no, I'm a doll of the G.O.Dis right down to the bones. Even though I have developed an ego, I couldn't be like Pollux or ORM. If you heal me now, I'd surely return as an enemy. Give it up. Finest.H.I plus NG off the enemy is the victor's right as well as duty. I don't need you to tell me that. Ares grabbed and held back Virgo, who was still trying to speak. And then, Leon stepped forward. He raised his fist and exerted enough strength to make the arteries on his arm visible. As my final act, let me give you a little hint in honor of your victory. Once I die, the G.O.Dis will have almost no pieces left. It's not that she doesn't have any left, but they probably don't have the combat power needed to defeat all of you. Do you know what that means? Who knows? Soul laughed bitterly at Leon's uncaring reply and remembered the appearance of the last doll other than himself. What he had just said was not strictly true. There were still two pieces left. One was Dina, who could still be controlled by the G.O.Dis whenever she wanted to, regardless of Dina's own will. And the other person. Nonetheless, these two alone weren't enough to face against their innumerable foes. The G.O.Dis would definitely move the Ouroboroses to compensate for it. It means that it's starting. This attack will trigger the end of the world. Is that so? Leon didn't care about Soul's last words and simply swung his fist down. An explosive sound echoed. Karkinos transformed into his gigantic form and jumped in front of everyone to receive the shockwave. The pressure from the punch was like a storm that lasted for several seconds. When it was finally over, there were huge cracks on the ground that extended all the way to the horizon. Soul was no longer there. Only the faint light particles that remained hinted that he had even existed until now. Even they would disappear soon. Why? Who knows? Men are foolish creatures. If it were this mistress, I would want to survive no matter what. Scorpius muttered in exasperation as she lightly patted Virgo's head, which was hanging down. With this, the last piece of the G.O. disk that could oppose the 12 stars had vanished. Anyone could predict what would happen after this. It's starting. He had certainly said so. There was no need to say what it was. Now that the last piece called Soul had disappeared, the G.O. disk had only one move left. And so, the time was close at hand. The end of the world would soon begin. It looks like we can't sit back and relax. I'm returning to Blutgong immediately. From now on, time is of the essence. Megrez, let me quickly examine the mana engine you designed. I'll take action right away. It's a race against time now. It was unclear what SEI and his companions were saying, but they seemed to be able to understand each other. Perhaps, the reason the heroes were gathered together was also to discuss this matter. SEI did not mention it. Besides, there were things that needed to be done. There were things that he could do. Megrez-sama, I think I'll return to Leavition. I can't really help you in a fight, but I should at least tell them that Ruppus-san is not an enemy. Is that your answer? Yes. All right, then I'll use my skill to send you to Leavition. What SEI was trying to do was minuscule compared to what would happen in the future. But he was the only one who could do this minuscule thing. It wouldn't be convincing even if Megrez said that Ruppus was not an enemy. Even if Ruppus herself told them that she was not an enemy, N.O. would believe her. However, since he was unrelated to what had happened 200 years ago, people would believe his conclusion, which he had reached by his own efforts. He couldn't do anything to help in this battle, but he could be a bridge between the humanoids and Ruppus. If SEI Dano has decided on this, very well, we are resolved to do the same as well. Wisdom King-sama, please send us to Draupnir. I'll persuade King K.U.Mar to join in. Grr. Oh, Friedrich. Do you want to come too? Kinko and Friedrich also chose to follow SEI's lead and walk the same road as Ruppus. Gantz and Jean didn't raise any objections and quietly nodded. However, among the people present, only Merak did not move. He stared intently at Virgo. It was as if he had seen something unbelievable. His lips were quivering. White wings, and that face and hair color, it couldn't be. Yoyu, I'm sorry, pardon my rudeness, but are your parents actually your foster parents? No. I've never seen my father and mother. It seemed that I was abandoned in the forest as a baby, and Granny picked me up and raised me. What? Merak was shocked to the core as he widened his eyes while staring at Virgo. He had a complicated expression that seemed to have a mix of delight and sadness. Meanwhile, Part Hino spoke up. As I thought, that is the case. What? Granny. It's simple. The Sky King Dano is probably your real father. The atmosphere froze. Mizar, who was about to return to Blutgong, and Megrez, who was about to turn towards Svalin, stopped. After all, it was a shocking statement with considerable destructive power. Virgo's cry resounded to the heavens. Taurus a while ago, Libra and the 3 heroic spirits serving as her escorts had reached Taurus in the underworld of Helheim without any major obstacles. Taurus was quietly sitting in front of the head of the sleeping Ouroboros. It's been a long time, no, it's been just a few days, Taurus. You know why I'm here, right? I'm here to pick you up. There was no need for a long conversation between them. Libra spoke briefly, while Taurus responded with a single word. If one didn't know the circuit misdances, it would be impossible to know what they were talking about. Taurus stood up slowly and quietly clenched his fist. I'll go after cleaning up this mess. Taurus said this as light began to accu.malate in front of him. The light emitted by the Earth Ouroboros took on a humanoid shape. This was the creation of an avatar, just like what the Fire Ouroboros and the Sun Ouroboros had done. This was nothing strange. Except for the Moon Ouroboros, which was already awake, all of the Ouroboroses would create and send out avatars. In that case, it wouldn't be so convenient that only the Earth Ouroboros wouldn't do so. The created avatar was level 1000. Its combat power was comparable to Soul's. It was a transcendent being that could drive creatures to extinction by itself. Aldebaran. But it was shattered into pieces with one hit. Accompanying the destructive sound of the steel fist, the newly created avatar reverted to light particles and vanished. Even though it was an avatar, it was also a skill. Therefore, it was helpless before Aldebaran, which was a skill that could end skills. It was an instant kill that made one wonder what Leon's struggle was all about, but it was simply a matter of compatibility. Since its very existence was a skill, it could not possibly withstand a blow from Taurus. Well done, as expected of Taurus. Well then, let's go. Everyone's waiting. No, not yet. Saying that, Taurus swung his fist at Libra. Libra quickly evaded and the punch missed its target. However, there was no change in the power contained in that punch. He was attacking with the intention to kill. What are you playing at, Taurus? There's no need for me to speak of the reason. You know it better than anyone else. I don't understand. Libra readied her weapon as she stared at Taurus with an icy look. If the other party was going to do something like this, then it would only lead to a battle. Regardless of who you might be, if you continue with this, I will counterattack. I'll interrogate you after immobilizing you, so I recommend that you speak before it becomes an interrogation. I see. You're unaware of your own condition. Or did you destroy your own memory in order to deceive yourself? The corrupted data. When Taurus said this, Libra stopped moving for a moment. That's right, the corrupted data. It had been inside her since her reunion with Ruppas. However, its true nature was still unknown, and it had not been repaired at all. No, had she even been trying to repair it up until now? No, now wasn't the time to think about it. First of all, she needed to calm this angry bull down. If necessary, it would be fine to finish him off. Actually, wouldn't that be better? It was all for the sake of her master. Please stop, both of you. There's no need for 2 of the 12 stars to fight each other. That's right. Let's calm down and talk about it first. The heroic spirits were panicking due to the sudden development, but the 2 of them didn't stop. Libra scattered shots while maintaining her distance. But Taurus advanced while ignoring the attacks. However, Libra had the advantage in maneuverability. She jumped around agilely, not letting Taurus close the distance between them. The only threat that Taurus posed was his overwhelming destructive power. Furthermore, his strength was only effective at close range. He had no way of making ranged attacks. Once this was known, making an effective strategy was simple. All one needed to do was attack from a distance. Unaware of my own condition? Deceiving myself? What foolishness, since I'm a golem, memory manipulation won't work on me. You're the one who is suspicious, Taurus. Libra fired her cannon at Taurus, forcefully blowing him away. It was tedious to shave away at his constant intuition, but at the same time, it was a simple task that almost seemed to guarantee victory. It would be fine to keep wearing him down without letting him come close. Then, she could fire a single shot of brachium when he was within range. That would be the end of it. It's true that my memory has been corrupted, that's right. I should just repair it. I'm sure that if I repair my memory, Dinasama's true ident.I.tie and the reason for Taurus madness will become clear. Libra didn't notice it. She didn't realize how strange her thoughts were right now. I should just repair it. This meant that she could have always repaired it at any time, but she hadn't done so. Why hadn't she done it? Normally, she should have considered this first. But she was unable to do so since she was a golem. There was no other reason. She was simply convinced that it was all for the sake of her master. As long as she recognized this to be true, her thoughts would not go any further. They simply stopped when the answer was evident. This was the sad difference between people and golems. Corrupted data, repairing. Without any justifications, she thought that it was time to repair the corrupted data. There was no reason and no doubt. This was because it was the right thing to do. She was essentially a tool. The purpose of her existence was to benefit her master and eliminate any threats to her master. Therefore, she had no doubt. And, is that so? The doll I see, Taurus. Everything is exactly as you have said. Indeed, I'm acting for the sake of my master, sneered. For the sake of Alovina-sama. An expression that had never been seen before appeared on her face. And the brilliance of Brachium swallowed Taurus and the heroic spirits. Chapter 167. It all started more than 200 years ago. It started when Rupas Maful stormed into the sanctuary of the G.O.Dis and took the selection scales. The selection scales was originally prepared by the G.O.Dis for the gatekeeper of the sanctuary, thus its original master was Alovinus. Yet it was modified and then used to build a new golem, Libra. However, the scales already had a mission by the time it was taken. Its mission was to monitor Rupas Maful, and reduce her combat power from within. Yes, there were two spies among the tyrannical 13 stars. One was Dina, the manifestation of the G.O.Dis. The other was the emotionless doll, Libra. This mission was not lost even when Mizar rebuilt it. This was only natural. After all, Mizar was already under the control of the G.O.Dis when he returned from the sanctuary. It had been deliberately left behind without being deleted. Even Mizar's copy didn't know about it. It was the original Mizar who built Libra. The copy was merely a spectator. Since he was just a copy, even he didn't expect that his original self would do something so stupid. After it was completed, it became the Steel Maid who was seemingly the most unwavering and most loyal to Rupas among the tyrannical 13 stars. She was unwavering and unshakable precisely because she was a doll without any emotions. As a result, Libra had not wavered at all since the beginning. She had been faithfully and emotionlessly following the original mission given to her by her true master. That had not changed after 200 years. She protected the royal tomb in order to prevent the humanoids from gaining powerful weapons. Her reason for killing the intruders was to reduce the combat power of the humanoids. After her reunion with Rupas, she partially destroyed her own memory so that she could deceive herself into playing the role of a perfect subordinate. This had been possible because she was a golem. However, she still did not forget her mission. Regardless of what Libra might have been thinking, her thought processes would always return to the completion of her mission. Libra didn't question the apparent contradiction. After all, to her, it was correct. She decapitated Jupiter so that Rupas wouldn't learn of any information she didn't need to know. Even during that time when the Demon King was about to say something unnecessary, she purposefully interrupted him. However, not everything went well. One of the two spies, Dina, who should have been the manifestation of the G.O.Dis, was behaving strangely. At first glance, she seemed to be following the G.O.Dis scenario, but it was her fault that the real scenario was being derailed. Dina had directed Mars to move Ares, who eventually returned to Rupas. It was the same with Scorpius and Agacaros. If one were to trace the causes, they had returned due to Dina's guidance. At Gjallarhorn, she deliberately misspoke and revealed herself as a spy for the demons at an early stage. What was she doing? What in the world was all of that for? Libra had been suspicious of Dina from the start. Without even realizing it herself, she had suspected her of treachery. It was the same when the Demon King was conversing with Rupas. The timing of Dina's interruption was too late. When Libra thought about it now, wasn't she just pretending to be on the side of the G.O.Dis because she was being monitored by Libra? Therefore, she had advised Rupas many times to investigate Dina. She thought that if Rupas suspected Dina and questioned or interrogated her, everything would come to light. However, although Rupas suspected Dina, she did not investigate further for some reason. The latter was allowed to do as she pleased. It was as if Rupas was convinced that she was on her side. What had happened? Did they have a private discussion without her noticing? No, there had been no such evidence. She hadn't picked up on any such conversation. Instead, it was Libra who had messed up. When Dina revealed that she was a spy for the demons, Libra had to pretend that she knew nothing about it. Indeed, that conversation had been heard by Libra. She could pick up sounds from distant locations. There was no way that she would not have heard it. However, Since both of them belonged to the G.O.Dis faction, Libra wasn't able to expose her pretense. This led to an unnatural situation where she had to pretend that she had not been listening to what she should have heard. Later, when Libra became suspicious of Dina, she wanted to reveal the fact that she had heard their conversation, but it was meaningless to do so by then. After all, Rupaz was allowing Dina to do whatever she wanted despite knowing all of that. If she had revealed it, she would be exposing the fact that she had lied and risk casting suspicion on herself. However, the act was over. Dina was no longer reliable. Fortunately, there were only two people here, Taurus and Libra herself. There would be no witnesses. Therefore, she should just quickly kill Taurus and finish what the Earth Ouroboros avatar could not do. After that, she would A.S.S.A.S.Sinate the others one by one. With her decision made, Libra aimed her cannon at Taurus. Goodbye, Taurus. First, she would finish off one person. With this, the tyrannical 12 stars would never be able to fully A.S.Semble. Did you think that everything would proceed that smoothly? But suddenly, there was an unexpected voice. When she looked back, she saw the Queen of Fairies, surrounded by heroic spirits. Her brother, the strongest fairy, was on standby next to her. She cast a cold glance at Libra. You've finally shown your true colors, Libra. I was thinking that it would end up being something like this when you said that you wanted to go to Helheim alone. I had already been exposed? Libra remained expressionless, despite being somewhat surprised. However, she kept her cannon pointed at Taurus. She watched Pollux while trying to antic.I.P.8 her next move. When did you notice? Almost from the very beginning. From the very beginning. Yes. Specifically, it was when I found out that you left the G.O.Dis avatar alone. Libra, you too. How is it that even though you're with her, you allowed such a dumb thing to take place? I'm in such a deep state of apology that I'm high above the mountains. You're not repenting, are you? Let alone being deep in apology, you're climbing high above the clouds. Soon, I'll be leaving the atmosphere. You piece of metallic Traz.H. Plus she remembered that conversation from back then. Indeed, that was a mistake. It hadn't seemed like it was a mistake before, but it was certainly a mistake to leave Dina alone after that. Furthermore, it could be said that this mistake had happened because of Dina. By casting doubt on herself, Dina brought Libra's inconsistency, which should have been hidden in the shadows, to light. Even if you can fool Rupasama, you can't fool me. Don't think you can get by with such poor acting. It's not like you to leave such an obviously suspicious person alone, rather, it should be impossible for you to do so. Yet you let the self-proclaimed advisor, the G.O.Dis avatar, do as she pleased. Then there is only one explanation. That you were her collaborator. I wished I was just overthinking it though. Pollux crossed her arms and the heroic spirits responded to her fighting spirit and lined up in front of her. Castor had already drawn his weapon, while Taurus slowly lifted his axe. There were heroic spirits in front and the bull behind. Libra had been completely pincered. Both advancing and retreating would be difficult for her. She could have wiped them out with Brachium, but she had already used it a while ago. In other words, she was completely cut off. Her escape routes had been blocked. At least, normally, one would think so. I see, it seems that I've underestimated you. In that case, I'll quietly retreat from here. Will you be able to do that? Pollux. You're very clever, but your low combat power really is a weakness. Because of that, you're bound by the same perspective as normal people. Huh. Libra mocked her and simply flew up as if she didn't care about the ceiling. No, in truth, it was no different from a ceiling not being in the way at all. After all, if Libra could break through walls, ceilings, and floors whenever she pleased, as if they were jelly. Imagine this. A prisoner was locked in a jail, but the walls and ceiling were made of jelly. No matter how well it was locked, it wouldn't be a perfectly sealed room if they were made of jelly. That's right. Even if it was enclosed by walls and a ceiling, it wouldn't be considered a confinement area if they were so fragile. In other words, even though it seemed as if the front, back, left, right, up, and down were all blocked, only the front and back were actually blocked. Up, down, left, and right. This was a net that was full of holes, which allowed one to easily escape. Wait! Pollux shouted to stop Libra, who was digging through the ceiling and causing rubble to fall. Even though Castor managed to block them at the last moment, the ceiling continued to collapse. We should also leave, now. If Castor and the heroic spirits were the only ones here, they could have smashed through the ceiling in pursuit without worrying about the collapsing rubble. Taurus would be buried alive, but he wasn't so weak as to die from this. They could just dig him out later. It wouldn't be a problem. However, Pollux was different. She would actually die from this. Therefore, Castor had no choice but to escape in order to protect Pollux. Sorry, elder brother. It seems I'm just a burden, don't worry about it. Castor carried Pollux, while the heroic spirits lifted Taurus. And they left Helheim without being able to capture the treacherous scales. Taurus, I'll be stopping here. The two of you, please return to Midgard on your own. After completing our errands on Earth, Dina suddenly stopped in between the two universes on our way back to Midgard. I actually predicted that this would happen, so I refrained from asking any questions for now. As soon as I return to Midgard, the G.O.Dis will take control of me and wake the Ouroboroses. So, I'm done here. I keep causing trouble for you every time. Yes, indeed. Dina looked at me and laughed as if she had been troubled. But I didn't see any intention of reprimanding me for it in her face. However, this is the path I have chosen. This is the path that I chose as Dina, and not as the G.O.Dis proxy. I was like a doll until I met you, you have made me into a person, so I have no regrets. But, I can only serve you up until this point. As she said that, a smile appeared on Dina's face. She knew the destiny that lay ahead of her. This was the end of the road. As the G.O.Dis avatar, she was bound to the G.O.Dis in a way that could not be compared to Pollux's ties to the G.O.Dis. The G.O.Dis could take control of her consciousness and possess her whenever she wanted. Furthermore, this couldn't be prevented by any item or skill. Equipment that sealed skills would be meaningless. Therefore, there were only two options. One was to kill Dina. Rupa-sama. If you kill me here, you'll have some time before the next avatar is born. Goodbye. This was the script that Dina had decided on from the start. She would mess up the G.O.Dis scenario and she herself would disappear in the end. By doing so, the entire scenario would be ruined and Rupas could act freely until the next avatar was born. This was definitely the best move. There were no better alternatives. But at that time, don't hesitate, that's what you said. Yes. I know. Don't hesitate, I have already decided to defeat the G.O.Dis and save you. Instead of choosing the best option here, I specifically opted to choose a better option. The best move? I had no need for it. I had always been a simple fool who pushed my way through with brute force. The choice of the wise would never have suited me from the beginning. I had already decided long ago to pick a fight with the divine. In that case, why shouldn't I save my subordinate who had always been loyal until now? We have a promise. If you were to rouse the G.O.Dis ire, I'll do everything I can to protect you. When she heard my reply, the relieved Dina laughed in a funny way. A tear shone at the corner of her eye. You're really a fool. You already knew that though, right? No, I didn't know. I had no idea that you're a fool to this extent. I see. Dina closed her eyes and pulled something from her bosom. It was a S.H.I plus New York key. Furthermore, it had immeasurable power. The key to the heavens, simply put, it's the GM's authority. I'll give this to you. I've already prepared the settings. Please activate it when the time comes. Wasn't this key supposed to have been in Castor's hands? That's a fake, you know. To deceive the one who was monitoring me, actually, since we've already gotten to this point, I suppose there's no reason to be vague anymore. In order to deceive Libra-sama, I asked ORM to play along in order to feed false information. Therefore, the key that ORM now possesses is naturally also a fake. Well, wandering around in the Argo, which was loaded with heroic spirits, was like saying, I have it here. Please come and rob me. I wouldn't do something so silly. I wasn't surprised by the name that Dina mentioned. Actually, I had considered that it might have been the case. Well, that's true. When Dina said that she was a spy for the demons, she should have overheard it, yet she didn't fly over. Furthermore, when Libra killed Jupiter, his body vanished instantly. If I considered it now, that was evidence that she was actually on the G.O.Dis side. Even if a demon died, its body would remain for a while. After all, I had slain so many demons and paraded their heads in the past. So there was no mistake. However, when Libra killed Jupiter, his body disappeared on the spot. This was impossible unless it had been done by the power of the G.O.Dis. That's right. When I had said that that person was exposing their true colors, I was referring to Libra. Dina's movement had been inefficient because she was being watched by the G.O.Dis through Libra. That was why, when she was before Libra, she had to play the incomprehensible role of being the G.O.Dis doll who was the demon's spy that pretended to be Rupa's subordinate. Even I thought that I was imposing a really troublesome role on her. I honestly felt sorry for her. N.O. Body could have managed such a role, except for Dina. It's hard to see what's right under your nose. The G.O.Dis won't have thought that I was holding on to it all along. Also, the arc has been completed. It's a product that I'm truly confident of, created by combining Midgard's alchemy and modern science. To think that you made it all by yourself, good work. Hee. Actually, I didn't do it by myself. I was helped by a company that I founded. Actually, all of our employees are from Midgard. They are people who died over there long ago. Scorpius-sama did a good job of it. Dina's words made me think of those people. No, that race. There was only one race that had died and was involved with Scorpius. I see, it was certainly strange now that she mentioned it. Since Dina had been manipulating the demons from within, it would have been weird if she had just watched them be destroyed without doing anything. It wasn't that Scorpius couldn't be manipulated, but to think that this had been within her calculations as well. Needless to say, Scorpius wouldn't have made a blunder in finest.h.I plus ng them off and would have properly put an end to their lives. No doubt, she would have even confirmed that they were really dead. However, Dina could resurrect the dead, provided that they had been dead only for a short time. Furthermore, she could manipulate time itself, so it wasn't impossible. Died over there, Scorpius, I see. Anything you've had a hand in was a job well done. Indeed, she had been deceiving everyone for 200 years. There was no reason for her to die when she had played out her role. She had worked hard enough. She had saved me. So now, it was my turn. I'll seal myself in here. Even if the G.O.Dis still manages to find me, it should at least buy you some time. Ah, you can just sleep peacefully. It's my fight from this point onwards. I'll take the baton from here. I'll place my trust in you then. Yeah, trust me. I spoke strongly as if I was speaking for myself to hear, and stroked Dina's head. As I turned my back to her, I felt Dina stopping her own time. Until the G.O.Dis found her, well, it wouldn't even take a day. In the meantime, I had to be prepared. Otherwise, it wouldn't even constitute a real challenge to the G.O.Dis. However, before that, there was still one final decision to be made. I've kept you waiting, ORM. I'm coming back right now. We needed to settle who among us was better suited to challenge the G.O.Dis. Chapter 168. When people stayed in their rooms and didn't spend time talking to someone else, they would naturally spend more time thinking. During such times, ORM had been thinking. He continued to ask himself questions. What is this world? Who am I? This world, yes, this world was the G.O.Dis miniature garden, a toy box that she had created. And he was merely a stage device that spread despair to the people in her story. There had been no objections. There had been no doubts. This was because the omnipotent and omniscient existence had decided that it should be that way. He didn't even question if it was correct. If the deity decided it, it would be providence. The very act of questioning it would be wrong. Carnivores attacked, killed, and ate herbivores, but they were not evil. They could not live otherwise. That hadn't really been decided on by anyone. They did it because they had to do so. That was providence. That was the decision of the deity. When did it all begin? As the G.O.dis minion, he had acted as the evil that she wanted. If he were to consider when it had all started, it should have been several tens of thousands of years ago. ORM's role in the scenario was to bring despair and fear to the people. In the end, he had to pretend to be defeated by the hero who bravely challenged him. He would also deal a fatal injury so that the hero would be forced to leave the stage. It was a simple role. In the first place, there was no creature that could defeat the Ouroboros ORM. If he were to get serious, he could easily defeat the hero. A certain hero had once said, "For the sake of my loved ones, I won't lose." A certain hero had once yelled, "For the peace of the people." Those who challenged him had their own beliefs. They would speak loudly of whatever they were. ORM had always listened to them with a sense of emptiness. ORM simply couldn't understand what they were talking about. Even though he could understand the meanings of their words, he couldn't understand what had inspired them so much. Loved ones? Someone more important than themselves? Family? What's that? What in the world was that? He didn't know what those were. The G.O.dis had never taught him these things. Therefore, ORM simply played his role and buried them all. He didn't even know what kind of brave and precious existences they were, he simply killed them all. When did it all begin? When did he start taking an interest in such things? The fairy princess Pollux, someone like him who was given the opposite role, was able to understand the hearts of the heroes. And because she understood them, her heart was screaming. ORM didn't understand. He couldn't understand why the fairy princess was lamenting. Does she know? Why do these people called heroes stand against me, to the point of throwing their short lives away? What in the world is inspiring them? She must have understood that. I don't understand. My heart has never hurt. But, seeing her tears, he understood that what he had been doing must have been something terrible. If he were a human and was one of those heroes, would he be able to understand the reason for those tears? When did it all begin? He had come to dislike being a puppet in an endlessly repeat.I.tiv story. The protagonist would change, but the story would remain the same. When he thought about it now, it might have been his first rebellious act against the G.O.dis. It was just a trivial act of self-satisfaction, so it might not actually be a rebellion. ORM thought that if he were to create a puppet to act in his stead, he might feel a bit better. Unlike the other Ouroboroses, since ORM was still active, he didn't need an avatar. But he still decided to create an alter ego all the same. When he finally noticed it, he realized that the avatar he had created was far from his intended purpose. Instead, it was more like the opposite. It looked like the heroes that ORM had wanted to understand. It looked like a human. If he were a human hero, he might have been like this. As if reflecting his imagination, ORM's alter ego came into existence. ORM named it Terra. The world is afraid. Huh. While sitting on his throne, ORM murmured softly. Saturnus responded in confusion. It couldn't be helped that she couldn't understand his sudden talk about the world. But ORM didn't think that it was necessary to explain further. He thought that she would understand its meaning soon even without any explanation from him. Look, she's almost here. She's returning from another world beyond this universe after having regained her true power and memories. The true monster, who has forcefully distorted and destroyed the decisions of the G.O.dis, Providence, is coming. It's the return of the king. As soon as he spoke, the world trembled. It was very similar to the Flugel's skill, coercion. But the area of effect and power were different by many orders of magnitude. Saturnus couldn't even stand up, and could only grind her teeth. The world rumbled in fear of the return of the king. This was not a hallucination. Her return was enough to cause the rotation of Midgard to slow down slightly. An abnormal hurricane now swirled over the dark continent. The moon drifted closer to Midgard as if it was attracted to it. The seas rose as a result. Once it had reached this point, her very existence was already a concept of power. Ruppes did not wield power. She was power itself. She was an existence that was so overwhelming and intimidating that the entire world, no, the entire universe seemed to yield to her. Regardless of the actual distance, her existence could be sensed instinctively. Ruppes Moffel, as she was more than 200 years ago, had truly returned. ORM sensed this and stood up from the throne. Are you going to fight? Saturnus looked at ORM as if she was seeing something she couldn't understand. She really couldn't understand at all. Anyone with proper senses would know how meaningless the action that ORM was trying to take was. Wasn't it fine to just leave them alone? Ruppes and Alovenus, let these uncontrollable monsters crush each other. She couldn't see any merit for ORM to purposefully fight Ruppes. Please stop, Your Majesty. There's no point in doing this. After PAS.sing through the time S.P.A.CE tunnel, Bennett and I returned to the land of Midgard once again. Even if I took into account the fact that Dina had sealed herself in the subs.P.A.CE, the amount of time during which I could move freely was probably less than a day, probably not even 10 hours. There was no time. If I missed this opportunity now, our match would have to be pushed further back. There might not even be another chance to settle who would be the victor between us. So I would have to settle now what we couldn't settle 200 years ago. One might wonder if it was really the time to be doing such things. Since both the Demon King and I were aiming to defeat the G.O.Dis, one might say that the right thing to do would be to form an alliance instead of fighting each other. That was true. Indeed, that would be the right thing to do. If I was being honest, what I was trying to do now was overwhelmingly useless and certainly inefficient. I used Xgate to retrieve my equipment and, while I was at it, trans.m.u.ted so I could change out of my clothes. The time required was almost instantaneous though, so I might not have needed the part.I.shin after all. Are you really going to fight the Demon King now? I've kept him waiting for so long. Even though he's so far away, you can feel it too, right? His fighting spirit. I understand that, but I don't think it's meaningful to do this now. That's true, it isn't a smart choice, but it's not about reason. ORM himself didn't have a persuasive answer for Saturnus. This was because, as she had pointed out, this fight was meaningless. No, there was a reason for ORM to fight, but objectively speaking, its priority was not really that high. It obviously wasn't something that he should be doing right now. After Dina had disappeared from Midgard, Ruppes returned. If Ruppes had erased Dina, that time would have been delayed for a while. Even if it were to happen, it would be after the birth of the next avatar of the G.O.Dis. But somehow, he knew, Ruppes hadn't killed Dina. In that case, the twilight of the G.O.Ds was near. The end of time was approaching right before their eyes. The G.O.Dis would find Dina and control her. If that were to happen, it couldn't be stopped anymore. Everything would move on to the final stage. There was no doubt about this. Today was the day that Midgard would meet its end. When he thought about it, it was evident how pointless it was for him to fight Ruppes now. A wise person would say, consider the situation. Is this really what you should be doing right now? It's fine to leave it for later. Calm down and look at the bigger picture. Oh, right. That was certainly correct. But even so, ORM still answered. If we keep dragging our feet, we can't continue to move forward. That's the kind of person I am, and so is ORM. One couldn't hope to fight the G.O.Dis with a heart still lingering with regrets. Now that I had regained my memories, this was the only feeling that I had. My fight with him had started 200 years ago, and it still wasn't over yet. I couldn't possibly challenge the G.O.Dis in such an incomplete state. In the first place, there were two people who had the right to challenge her. It would be strange for them to move on to the next stage without first settling who had the right to challenge the G.O.Dis. If it were you, you would understand what I'm feeling, right, Bennett? Humph. In response to my words, Bennett glanced away as if she was uninterested by what I had to say. Surely, she must have understood how ORM and I felt. After all, she was the one who had been waiting for 200 years to fulfill her wish for a settlement. I would be acting on my own ego from this point on. I would be clearing up the regrets that still remained in my heart. It was just a boring task. But it was something that was very important to me. Besides, he couldn't just be left alone, since this was a battle for the right to challenge the G.O.Dis. A wise person would say that the challenger did not need to be one person. A kind person would say that they could share the right. A gentle person would say that they should work together. All of them were right. I was the one who was making a mistake. But even if I knew that it was a mistake, I wouldn't correct it. In the end, it was the choice of a fool. I knew that. The path I had chosen was neither wise nor right. It was certainly not kind. It's nothing but obstinacy, ORM said and smiled quietly. He knew that it was a mistake, but he was still going to go through with it. Determined, he walked past Saturnus, causing his cloak to flutter. Saturnus grabbed the edge of his cloak, but she quickly let go. Right now, even Saturnus herself couldn't understand her own feelings. No, she didn't want to understand, since it would be too disrespectful. Therefore, Saturnus put on the mask of a subordinate, but she couldn't hide her overflowing emotions, so she pleaded. Please be sure to come back alive. We demons need you. Of course I will. I'm not fighting in order to die. ORM turned his back to her. A smile appeared on Saturnus, who was in the midst of an emotional turmoil. The demons were dolls, Dina had said so, but unexpectedly, they might not have been abandoned. Certainly, their bodies were lifeless things created by the G.O.Dis, but they still had hearts. Terra, Luna, and Mercurius certainly had their own hearts. ORM felt that he had done something terrible to Mercurius. He had believed that ORM possessed the key, but what ORM had was a fake. No, even if ORM had the real thing, he would still be unable to transform the demons into living beings. The true power of that key could only be unleashed by those people who were connected to the G.O.Dis, in other words, Dina, the avatar of the G.O.Dis, and Parthinos, the guardian of the sanctuary. However, Dina couldn't risk having her treachery be discovered by the G.O.Dis, while Parthinos was the enemy of the demons. In other words, Mercurius was stuck right from the start. After all, they were just dolls that could become chess pieces at the whim of the G.O.Dis. It wouldn't be a pity even if they died in vain. That was what he had always thought. But maybe it wasn't just Mercurius, but also all of the demons who had died so far, including Pluto and Jupiter. Everyone might have had a different way of life, but there was only one way to change the fate of the demons. There was no other way besides that. That would be to have the G.O.Dis, who wrote the scenario in the first place, rewrite the scenario and change the character settings of the demons. There was no other way. And only Rapazmoffel had the power to realize it at the low probability of 0.1%. But if Rapaz were to be left alone, even if she were to win against the G.O.Dis despite that slim chance, the demons would only return to living in fear under her. In that case, this battle was inevitable. This world shouldn't have lost Rapazmoffel, but she couldn't be left alone either. In that case, I'll control her. I'm an Ouroboros. I can't fight the G.O.Dis directly. Even if I try, this body will reject the battle since it was born as a representative of the G.O.Dis. But if I can defeat Rapaz and use that power for myself. Rapaz had now been completely awakened. His chance of victory over her in her current state was probably less than 10%. However, it would be meaningless to defeat Rapaz in her incomplete state. It was meaningful now. It was meaningful precisely because the current Rapaz who had returned to this world was the peerless and strongest existence. This is the first time in my life, for me to be the challenger. The heroes who had once challenged me might have been in a similar state of mind. ORM flew into the sky as he reminisced about the past. The scenery flowed past in an instant, and he arrived at a deserted island as if he had been guided there. The surface area was about 40% of the humanoids' habitable zone. But neither demons nor humanoids lived here because of the frequency of natural disasters occurring here. This was a good place to fight. At the same time as ORM arrived, the black-winged ruler descended from the opposite direction. Her face brimmed with absolute confidence as she was completely different from how she was before. Even though he was reluctant to admit it, he was forced to do so. Ah, the time has finally come. Undeniably, he was currently facing the Death Omen star. I've kept you waiting, Demon King. At this point, I believe words are unnecessary. I've come to settle things from 200 years ago. Rapaz smiled gently and lowered her arms. She didn't ready herself nor raise her guard. This natural body posture was her stance, showing how much leeway she had. Ah, let's settle it. Rapaz Mafal. As Rapaz had said, words were unnecessary at this point. Power was the only basis for interaction. The next time they met would be the signal for battle. This was what both of them had acknowledged. The gong to start the battle was already ringing. ORM disappeared from the spot and swung his right fist. On the other hand, Rapaz simply extended her index finger. Immediately after, the punch and finger collided. The deserted island that both of them were on turned into a wasteland in an instant. The surrounding sea was blown away like a flood. Chapter 169 Oniso. Hit, 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 hit. Lowering his waist and stepping firmly on the ground, ORM gave a sharp yell and swung his fist. Each and every strike was a deadly attack. True to the name of deadly attacks, they had power that wouldn't bring shame to the name. They were so destructive that a single hit could completely obliterate a dragon. They weren't just normal attacks. Each attack was imbued with countless skills, such as those that increased his status, increased damage, penetrated S.H.I plus ELDs, and countered skills. They were certainly not half-hearted attacks. The speed of ORM's punches exceeded 600 million kilometers per hour, which was faster than Mach 500,000. The number of digits had risen so much that it seemed like a child's delusion, but the truth was that he was actually punching that fast. His attacks were launched as if it was raining. And again, they weren't weak. Living creatures wouldn't be able to survive them. But in that case, what was this woman in front of him? Was she even a living creature? That might be so. But at least, she had surely exceeded the definition of a living creature as defined by the G.O.Dis. Ugh, they're not hitting her. Rapaz had been maintaining her natural pose without moving. When viewed by a third party from the sideline, it seemed as if ORM was attacking one-sidedly, while Rapaz was just standing there. Needless to say, normal people wouldn't be able to see ORM's punches due to how fast they were. Therefore, this hypothetical third party would barely be able to follow their speeds. This was based on the premise that they had at least 500 levels in their CLA.S.SES. If they had such power, then they could vaguely understand that ORM was making some sort of amazing attacks. Rapaz's hair was fluttering, and the ground behind her was being shaved off as if it were jelly without anyone touching it. If one were to look at it, they could guess that the cause was the shockwaves from ORM's attacks, so one would know that ORM was attacking even without being able to follow his speed. However, Rapaz, who had not moved, was still unharmed as she smiled in a relaxed manner. Actually, she wasn't really being immobile. She had been evading, defending, and averting the attacks. But her speed was so fast that she seemed to be unmoving. You're quite a slow starter, aren't you? Or are you taking a wait-and-see approach? Rapaz smiled and reached for ORM's forehead with her right hand. Then, she flicked his forehead with her middle finger. It was the so-called forehead flick. ORM disappeared from the surface of Midgard in an instant, and some asteroids that were floating near the planet shattered. At around the same time, a crater formed on the next planet. The landscape that reflected in ORM's eyes wasn't that of the Midgard that he was familiar with. He had gone beyond into outer S.P.A.Ce. I was blown away. This far with just a single blow? What's wrong? That was just a greeting. A telepathic message was received by the astonished ORM. He quickly got up in this world of zero gravity, but Rapaz had somehow already caught up before he realized it and was calmly waiting there. Needless to say, as was generally understood by most people, outer S.P.A.Ce wasn't an environment in which living things could survive. Since flugels usually lived in areas of higher altitude than other humanoids did, they tended to have higher vital capacities and were less likely to suffer from anoxia. They could function with less oxygen compared to other humanoids and could hold more air in their lungs. But even so, they were never designed to survive without oxygen. However, Rupaz was calmly present in such an environment. As if the surroundings were just a little dark, she merely stayed there casually. Since there was no oxygen, naturally, she wasn't breathing. But she was a monster after all. It would be pointless to expect her to suffocate. Even if she survived without breathing for an entire day, ORM wouldn't be surprised. This woman, Rupaz, was someone who could realize something like that as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I see. As expected of you. You're completely different from before. If you understand that, you should get serious, Moon Ouroboros. You'll regret it if you don't give it everything you've got. Then allow me to do just that. Normally, ORM kept his power sealed. This was similar to what Leon and the other tyrannical 12 stars did, but ORM's case was different in magnitude. His true form was an Ouroboros, a mechanism of the world itself that acted as an agent of the creation deity. ORM's body lost its original shape and began to change at an incredible speed. His total body length exceeded 123,000 kilometers. Just the tip of his nose alone was larger than the mountain of Vanaheim. Each of his fangs was larger than both Leon and the Dragon King. They were of a ridiculous size. However, a battle was not only about size. This was particularly true of this ridiculous world. It wasn't an uncommon sight for a small creature to overwhelm a larger creature. But there was still a limit to this. If it wasn't too big, it would be fine. However, if the sizes were too different, it wouldn't even be possible to fight to begin with. This wasn't the difference between a human and an ant. It was the difference between a human and a microbe, or a G.O.D and a human. Midgard ORM. This was his fearsome true form as an agent of the deity from mythology. Black scales covered his entire body, leaving no gaps in between. Each of them was large enough for Ares in his sheep form to stand on. Perhaps, this would convey how beyond common sense it was. But despite the size difference, ORM did not lose sight of Rupaz. His golden eyes were firmly on Rupaz, his small but powerful opponent. How spectacular! Is this your true form? Yes, it is. ORM opened his mouth, and a destructive light surged forth, completely engulfing Rupaz's field of vision. This was the judgment of the deity, the heavenly tribulation that living creatures could not resist. The S.H.I plus Ning light advanced in a straight line, annihilating the asteroids and comets that were in its path. After a long delay, the lights of those celestial objects were snuffed out. However, the one who had been struck by that destructive light had not disappeared. Although she had been thrown back several hundred kilometers, she was still watching ORM with her arms folded. Oh! The damage to Rupaz was slight, or perhaps even, zero. But ORM was unmoved by this. He had expected this. He knew from the start what would happen with an attack of this magnitude. If it had ended with something of this magnitude, it wouldn't be much of a challenge in the first place. Therefore, his heart wasn't agitated just because the attack was ineffective. ORM immediately moved on to the next attack. He moved his oversized limbs. Despite being so small and difficult for ORM to aim at, Rupaz was blown away in the direction of Mars. The universe in which Midgard existed and the universe in which the Earth existed were two sides of the same coin. The planets that existed in each universe were almost the same, except that the Earth was replaced by Midgard. Therefore, there were the Sun and the Moon, as well as other planets like Mars and Mercury. In the instant that Rupaz touched down on the ground, ORM fired another ray of destructive light. The radiance swallowed Rupaz, but it had already been proven that it was ineffective. However, what about the secondary disasters that were caused by this attack? The planetary core of Mars was destroyed by the Ouroboros' destructive light. The planet expanded and caught Rupaz in a huge explosion. Although the destructive end of a planet was nowhere near the supernova explosion of a star, it still generated overwhelming power and heat. ORM used his body to S.H.I plus eld Midgard from the shockwave, and watched the explosion with vigilance. Losing sight of the enemy in an explosion, it's the archetypal losing flag in a battle manga that my avatar likes to read. At the same time as he heard the telepathic message, ORM felt an impact on his head. He was being attacked by something. Something had crushed ORM's scales, which should have been tougher than anything in the world, and drew blood. Another blow struck, blowing ORM's huge body away to drift in S.P.A.ce. What is this? No, only one person could have done this. That person, Rupaz, was looking at him with the same appearance as before. It was as if she didn't even notice the planetary explosion. Even a planetary explosion is ineffective. You don't have to sigh. That previous attack was on the right track. It's actually effective. It's not like I didn't take any damage. But although it's effective, it won't claim my life even if it's repeated 100 times. What a monster. Forgetting that he himself was a monster, ORM thought so from the bottom of his heart. Rupaz slowly clenched her fist in front of him. She had only been observing the situation so far, but she was about to start a full-scale attack now. ORM didn't take his eyes off Rupaz, but his vigilance was pointless. Rupaz vanished, and his huge body was blown away. What a ridiculous monster. His size was comparable to a celestial object, while his power exceeded that of a celestial object by far. Yet he was so easily blown away. It was simply unimaginable. Could this mean that this woman could break a planet in two with a single punch? It might actually be possible, if it was this woman. Since there was a difference in their muscular strength, the size difference was just a disadvantage for ORM. Imagine this. Imagine a mosquito flying about in the middle of summer. The mosquito wasn't hurt when it was caught by a human hand. Instead, the human was blown away with a mere touch by the mosquito. Such a scene would be too surreal. Was there even any chance for the human to win in such a situation? The situation here was like that. No, it was actually even more hopeless than that. However, ORM had been prepared for such a struggle from the beginning. He had come here after having strengthened his resolve for it. In that case, how about this? ORM's huge body began to circle around Rupaz at a super high speed. He opened his mouth and bit his own tail, spinning continuously like a spiraling snake. Eventually, his speed exceeded the speed of light, and Rupaz was completely confined within. Those who were trapped within an Ouroboros that was moving faster than light would be separated from time itself. A second experienced by them might be a day, a year, or even a century on the outside. They would be trapped inside a prison called time. Then, the time that had elapsed outside would bare its fangs at them. Their bodies would deteriorate as if a long time had passed. Essentially, it was like Uras.H.I plus Matar's jeweled handbox, except that it was not nearly as simple. The time that was currently A.S. Salting Rupaz could easily reach tens of thousands of years. Unique skill, cyclical world, Ouroboros. I caught her. ORM was confident that even if this didn't bring him victory, Rupaz would surely have taken considerable damage. After all, Rupaz was still a living thing. Even if she had a long natural lifespan or had consumed longevity elixirs, her lifespan couldn't be unlimited. Old age was inevitable. If she was H.I.T directly by the waves of time, there would be nothing that even she could do. Yes, that was how it should be, but why? Why was Rupaz crossing her arms with a relaxed look as if she wasn't changing? That was a good idea. It's an interesting trick. But when it comes to tricks, I'm also quite confident in them. Sorry, I've already neutralized your attack. Neutralized? Ridiculous. That shouldn't be possible. The G.O.Dis shouldn't have created any counter skills for this. No, that fool certainly created one. Although she didn't mean for it to be a counter skill, she had given the skill to her own alter ego. When she said that, ORM finally noticed it. The time that should have been accelerated within the enclosed S.P.A.ce wasn't accelerating at all. On the contrary, it was even being rewound. This skill, ridiculous. This should be impossible. This isn't Rupaz's skill. Only Dina should have this skill. Yed posterior. It's one of Dina's unique skills that can slow down time, stop time, and even reverse time to the point before the target was born. Unique skills could only be used by the person in question. This was why they were called unique. In other words, this was an impossible situation. Her action completely defied reason. ORM activated a special version of Observing Eye that could only be used by agents of the G.O.DIS. This ignored any level difference and allowed him to look at Rupa's status. And he understood the reason. The CLA.S.S section in Rupa's status included the archenemy, a CLA.S.S that shouldn't exist. That was the reason. Indeed, a CLA.S.S with that name shouldn't exist. At least, it wasn't created by the G.O.DIS. In that case, who created it? Obviously, Rupas had created a CLA.S.S that was suitable for herself and added it to herself. That had probably been done by bending rules with the key to the heavens. Furthermore, when selecting which skills to acquire from leveling up, she selected the skill of her subordinate. This was the only explanation ORM could think of. After reasoning it out, ORM faced even greater despair. What's going on? This woman, does this mean that this woman can use all of the skills of the 12 stars? Is this okay? Staying so close to me, I'm going to burn you up. As she said that, Rupa's entire body was covered in a rainbow-colored flame. The G.O.D slaying flame, Messerthem, would deal continuous damage proportional to one's maximum HP upon contact. The heat spread out with Rupas at the center, ruthlessly scorching ORM's scales. It didn't matter how hard ORM was. No matter how tough he was, it was still meaningless. The heat of this flame increased limitlessly in proportion to the opponent's power. ORM slowed down momentarily as he struggled to endure the heat. In that instant, Rupas flew out and struck ORM with all of her might. Ultimately, petty tricks could not overcome despair. Rupas. Afiyuka's father. Father. In his drowsy consciousness, ORM remembered Tara when he was still a child. At first, he had just wanted to create a doll that would act in his stead. It was supposed to be a substitute to comfort himself and disguise his misery. Naturally, he would not have felt any sentiment towards such a thing. There was no reason he would feel any emotion towards it. That was what he had thought. When did it all begin? When did he become happy to be called by his child, Tara? When did he start to think that his child's smile was so precious? When he had finally noticed it, it was no longer a comforting doll, but an irreplaceable existence to ORM. ORM was an Ouroboros, which was an agent of the G.O.DIS. An Ouroboros was a perfect life form, which was as close as possible to immortality. He would die if he was killed by someone, but only the G.O.DIS could do such a thing. Therefore, the Ouroboros, ORM, didn't need a mate or an offspring. He was complete all by himself. There was no meaning in leaving offspring behind. Inevitably, he had never experienced what a parent would feel ever since he had been born. This is my first experience, my heart is so calm because someone else is nearby. Now, I feel that I can understand those heroes who had challenged me to protect what was important to them. When did it all begin? When did he become so weak? He was terrified of Rupa's Maffal. He was so afraid that there was nothing he could do about it. He had always thought that death was simply an end. He had even thought that it would be fine for him to die at any time. Yet, now that death had taken shape before him, he was terrified to such an extent. No, I don't want to die. I still want to live. No, not yet, I still haven't seen that child grow up. Furthermore, what would happen if I die? What would happen if that terrifying death omen star were to meet my son? No, I won't allow that to happen. That alone must not come to pass. I still cannot die. I don't want to die and leave my child behind. He still remembered how relieved he had felt when Rupas was gone. But that relief quickly turned into despair again. The G.O.DIS had given him a command, that it was time to close the curtains on this story. This would be the end of the demons. The evil Demon King would be overthrown by the heroes, and his subordinates would be culled by the humanoids. Tara would be no exception. I don't want that to happen. I won't accept it. It's just a scenario to the G.O.DIS, but to me, it's a priceless treasure. By the time he had noticed it, he was already ignoring the G.O.Dis script and subjugating the heroes. Chapter 170 ORM returned from fighting the heroes after taking parts of their bodies from them and reducing their powers by half with a curse. But there was no relief in his heart. He was still worried. After all, ignoring the G.O.Dis scenario was essentially rebelling against her. Although he had made up some plausible excuses, she probably hadn't believed it. The fact that 2 members of the 7 Luminaries, a group created by his son, were actually spies from the G.O.Dis faction was proof of this. Furthermore, no matter how one looked at them, one of them was obviously an alter ego of the G.O.Dis. The destruction of the demons seemed to have been averted, but the end had merely been slightly postponed. According to the G.O.Dis scenario, the demons were still evil that must be defeated. The future would not change unless this was fundamentally changed. But ORM couldn't do that. It wasn't a matter of power. Even if he defeated the other 4 Ouroboroses and challenged the G.O.Dis, he wouldn't be able to proceed further. The role of an Ouroboros was to manage the world and serve as the G.O.Dis agent. It hadn't been created to fight the G.O.Dis herself. This was an instinct that was independent of emotions and reason. It simply couldn't be resisted. Only Ruppas could challenge the G.O.Dis. Bennett Nash wasn't a bad option either, but since she wasn't interested in the G.O.Dis at all, she wouldn't even attempt to fight her. Ideally, Ruppas and Bennett Nash would join forces and, along with the tyrannical 12 stars, challenge the G.O.Dis together without exterminating the demons, but that would be difficult to realize. It would be hard to imagine Ruppas, who was so hostile to the demons, letting the demons escape. Before defeating the G.O.Dis, her attacks would surely be directed at them first. In order to overturn the G.O.Dis scenario, Ruppas was needed in this world. But Ruppas herself was the personification of terror for the demons. She was the Death Omen star. What should I do? What should I? If she could be cursed, the removal of the curse could be used as a bargaining chip. After brainstorming about how to make Ruppas obey him, ORM arrived at a plan that could only be described as naive. But he couldn't think of any other way. If he could defeat Ruppas and have her power with a curse similar to the one he had placed on the heroes, she would be forced to accept his request. If her power was halved before she even fought the G.O.Dis, it would be impossible for her to proceed further. Therefore, as long as the curse was successfully laid, he could use the temporary lifting of the curse as a condition to have Ruppas join him to defeat the G.O.Dis. Then, he could defeat her while she was still exhausted after fighting the G.O.Dis. It's just an empty theory now. After all, Ruppas is not around anymore. He only realized it after she was gone. Ruppas Muffle was the only one who could challenge the G.O.Dis. She was the only one who could overturn the G.O.Dis scenario. But everything was already too late. Ruppas had disappeared from the world, so there was N.O. Body left who could challenge the G.O.Dis. Just as ORM was about to give up, another traitor brought to him a devilish seduction. That's not really true, you know. It was only when she spoke that ORM noticed her presence for the first time. He hadn't realized it, but the alter ego of the G.O.Dis had been hiding in the room. When did she enter? He didn't notice it at all. It was impressive that she could hide her presence even from the Demon King. Her presence was completely eliminated to the point where she faded into the background. Despite being surprised, ORM pretended to be calm. I'm sorry, but I've been observing you for the past few years. And now, I'm convinced. This person has betrayed the G.O.Dis, it seems the report you had previously made was a lie. ORM silently gathered mana in his hand. Since she already knew, he had no choice but to kill her. However, killing the G.O.Dis alter ego was equivalent to declaring that he was a rebel. There was nothing he could do. It was already too late to salvage the situation. Furthermore, there was another spy. Even if he killed this one, the other spy would notice the abnormality. As ORM pondered this dilemma, the G.O.Dis alter ego made a suggestion. Would you like to join me? What? I'm also a person who has rebelled against the G.O.Dis, someone who wishes to end this boring story. This should have been impossible. As the alter ego of the G.O.Dis, she possessed the memories and personality of the G.O.Dis herself. Normally, it would be unthinkable for her to become independent of the G.O.Dis, since it would be like the G.O.Dis betraying herself. Aren't you, Allo Venus? I have 3 names: Venus of the demonic 7 luminaries, Ophiuchus of the tyrannical 13 stars, and my real name that was given to me by my parents, Dina, N.O. Body has ever given me the name Allo Venus. Is the alter ego of the G.O.Dis betraying the G.O.Dis herself? You find it hard to believe. Yes, I can't believe it, but now, I have no other choice but to bet that it is true. Fine, I'll take the bait and play along. The serpent that encircled the world took the bait of the serpent bearer. Fine. I don't know what she's aiming for, but I can use her. There's no way to back out of this anyway. And so the two of them formed an alliance. Dina then hid ORM's betrayal without revealing it to anyone. Moreover, although she didn't reveal her entire plan, she predicted that Rapaz would return after 200 years. In the meantime, she skillfully manipulated the demons so that the humanoids would not be exterminated until then. Now that he had gotten this far, he didn't know how to thank her. Although she might not have acted with good intentions, he had still received 200 years of time. Dina, the alter ego of the G.O.Dis, had reported, ORM isn't a traitor. He simply got frightened by the unprecedented invasion of the heroes and fought back seriously. The G.O.Dis had judged it as a shade of white that was ever so close to grey, and did not launch a full-scale purge. As a result, ORM and Terra managed to survive. Thanks to her, he had managed to arrive at this point. He just had to fight Rapaz directly, obtain victory, and then curse her. But the wall before him was too high. Still, he had not yet lost the battle. He couldn't afford to lose. Ophiuchus maintaining his fading consciousness with the strength of his will alone, ORM engulfed Rapaz with a ray of destructive light. He understood their pains now. He now knew of the feelings of those heroes who had challenged him and sacrificed their own lives, and understood how precious they were. Once upon a time, somebody had said that people could become as strong as they had to be for the sake of their loved ones. Ah, that's so true. For the sake of my son, I will become as strong as I need to be. Once upon a time, a man had yelled that he didn't care what would happen to himself as long as his significant other was happy. That's so true, hero. Your words were right. I was mistaken. I don't think we'll go to the same place when we die, but if we meet again, I'll apologize for everything that had happened in our previous lives. Therefore, now, just for this moment, lend me your strength. Rapaz was receiving ORM's attacks when she noticed that he was changing. Everything, including his attack power, speed, and the conviction, was different from before. She remembered this feeling. It was a route that Bennett Nash and herself had gone through. Interesting. Have you broken through your limit? ORM charged and used his Ma.S.S to push Rapaz into the Sunday naturally. ORM himself wouldn't be unharmed by such a move. The temperature at the sun's core was about 15 million degrees Celsius. No substance could possibly withstand the heat. ORM's scales were burned, and he was losing his consciousness in the heat. Still, he endured it because he had someone he loved. He had learned what it meant to care for somebody else. Are you prepared for self-destruction? You have an excellent resolve. Even though I'm of the sun attribute, I won't be immune to solar heat. I have to say, it's certainly hot and taxing for me. But, it isn't unbearable, you know. Rapaz laughed fiercely and grabbed a scale on ORM's head, throwing him overhead. ORM's head was burned, while Rapaz escaped from the sun's core. Of course, this wasn't the end. Using the materials that were floating around the sun, Rapaz activated her alchemy. Trends.m.u.te One-Eyed Hero. A huge old man was created out of stellar materials. His beard was long, and his face was obscured by a brimmed hat. Dressed in a black robe, one of his eyes was crushed, while the other was glowing with a strange light. Straddling an 8-legged horse, he was even larger than an Ouroboros, and he easily caught hold of ORM, who was large enough to encircle an entire planet. Grabbing ORM's head and tail, he started to exert enough force to pull ORM apart. ORM released a silent scream. If the opponent was huge, simply use an even larger being. It was a simple but effective move. ORM's torso creaked and his body began to tear. "St strong, she's too strong. Did I really think I could beat this monster until now? This is such a hopeless battle. Have you heroes been experiencing this all along?" The difference in power between Ruppas and ORM was about the same as the difference between ORM and the heroes of the past. They had never given up. Even though they understood the difference in power, they still challenged him. Even if they lost their arms and legs, their hearts did not break. They would continue to challenge ORM with just the brilliance of their souls. I can't lose. If I lose, I won't be able to face the people that I've killed." ORM roared and squeezed out the last bit of power beyond his limit. He crushed an arm of the huge old man, and then wrapped himself around him, Cruise.H.I+NG his neck. Seeing the false G.O.D reverting to asteroids, a relaxed look appeared on Ruppa's face. He's really starting to exceed the limit. I don't know what is changing his emotional state, but it's a big leap forward. ORM unleashed the destructive light from his mouth again, but this time, its power had increased considerably. It struck Ruppas, despite her guard, and Scr.A. past other celestial objects. The breath swallowed Ruppa's whole and blew her far away in an instant. Ruppas shrugged the attack off with one hand, but she lost sight of ORM in an instant. "I lost sight of him? Even with that huge body?" Her query lasted only for a moment. By the time she realized it, ORM had already summed his humanoid form and dropped an axe kick on Ruppas. She quickly raised her guard, but she was in outer S.P.A.ce where there was no firm footing. As her body was blown away, ORM resumed his Ouroboros form and chased after her. ORM roared to engulf her again, then changed back into his humanoid form to go around and kick her up. He then changed back into an Ouroboros to deliver a bite. He was attacking in a rage, utilizing his humanoid form which was originally intended to contain his power. "Oh. And the limit was finally Serpa.S. said. ORM's level finally exceeded the upper limit set by the G.O.Dis, reaching level 1500 like Bennett Nash. Naturally, he wasn't just a normal level 1500. At level 1000, ORM already had more power than Bennett Nash. Now, he had exceeded the limit. Therefore, his power was currently unknown. He had reached a level of strength that even Alovenus herself could not have guessed he could accomplish. After increasing his strength and speed, ORM became a ray of light and showered Ruppas with hits. Sometimes as a humanoid, sometimes as an Ouroboros, ORM used every technique at his disposal to take down his strongest opponent. "I can win. No, I have to win. Definitely." His mind was set on his son's prosperous future. That was all. That was why he must overcome this despair. "Now then, I'll recognize you as a formidable enemy." Just as he heard the telepathic message of Ruppas, who was still calm and collected even in this situation, a tremendous impact struck ORM's cheek. His fangs broke and his scales shattered. ORM barely managed to retain his consciousness. Meanwhile, Ruppas, who had become even more intimidating than before, was quietly floating before him. "Well done, ORM. And I'm sorry, I thought that I could win against a man like you by using only 50% of my power. 70%. From now on, I'll raise my power to the same level that I used to fight Bennett Nash." As she spoke, a rainbow-colored flame engulfed her entire body. This was Messertham, which she had used a while ago. But unlike before, it wasn't just a momentary use. It was now being activated constantly. Furthermore, she was also using the same skills as Parthinos. In an instant, she used multiple support divine magic on herself. There had been a moment when the difference in power had narrowed. But immediately after, it had widened again. Despair could not be overcome. That was why it was called despair in the first place.